Hello, hello, and welcome to the show. This is episode 306, I think, of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. Joining me today from Rutgers University, Dr. Henry Raymond, to talk about the CDC's new guidelines, and from CNN, S.E. Cupp, and I go way deep on a whole bunch of different things. My name is Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Stand up. Well, hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me on the journey that is life here on Stand Up Daily, talking about all the issues that matter to you, your family, your community, your country, your planet. And I am very happy to have you along the way and be in your ears whenever I can be learning along with you. Please support the podcast with a paid subscription. That is the scripted opening that I should probably go with each and every day. But, just every once in a while, toss it in there. Rebrand the show and ask you to sign up and give me money for doing the show. I'm here in the shed, in the Shedio in Rockland County, New York, where it's 63 degrees today. My 50 solar panels, we're getting the reps in, cranking it out, feeling good. Went for a run and a walk and got in the garden while also still interviewing 3 different people and doing a whole bunch of other work and taking care of the kids and dinner. So a very good day. I accomplished a lot. I ate well. I exercised. I got my work done. I got nature. What more can you ask for than that and staying in the moment? I love being flexible with my life and with my work. I hope that you are able to do that too. But I also would love to have a conversation with folks. Maybe we'll do a little bit of that this Thursday night at the Hangout, but I'd love to just talk about work-life balance and your workflow, because I love working from home, but I'm still getting used to it and trying to find ways to be most efficient. And I love one of the great things about hosting a podcast or a show like this and actually having lots of people listen is that you can reference those people and you can kind of crowdsource. Is that the phrase that we use now? Ideas, share ideas about life hacks and stuff. So I always love learning from you about anything from relationships to parenting to obviously being more efficient. And so there's little things that we can always share. And I always look forward to hearing from you if you work from home and how you're most efficient, how you get it done, because we're all so overwhelmed, feeling like we're always connected all the time. But what's important? What's important? Diet, exercise, peace of mind, being productive, making money, being responsible. Of course, all that. How do you find the balance is the question. All right, I'm done prattling on and rambling on. Now it's time for the news and what I call the last 24 hours of news in sound bites and some little pithy analysis from me. Here we go. Let's start just with a couple of headlines. First, a 6th woman now has leveled allegations of sexually inappropriate conduct against my governor, Andrew Cuomo, accusing him of touching her without consent late last year during an encounter at the governor's mansion, according to the Albany Times-Union. Also want to mention something about another governor, and that is in Arkansas, where the governor has passed a law that bans nearly all abortions in a sweeping new measure. Arkansas passed a new law banning nearly all abortions in the state, and it will force the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit Roe v. Wade. But opponents vow to block it before it takes effect later this year. Of course, talked about this a lot of throughout the years with Professor Eric Siegel, Liz Winstead, and so many others. And I talk about the Cuomo stuff with S.E. Cupp coming up. But I just got to mention what I think is probably one of the most important issue right now, which is having to do with the future of our democracy and access to voting. And last night on Rachel Maddow's show, Mark Elias, who is a lawyer fighting for Democrats and voting rights for everybody, he is really passionate. And listen to this.
Rachel, it's just different this time. And this is not to say that there are not other problems in the world. I recognize that there are other stories that have to be covered. But I am begging America and the media to pay attention to this. Right now, we are facing an avalanche of voter suppression that we have not seen before, at least not since Jim Crow, in state after state. It's not just Iowa. It's not just Georgia. It's not just Arizona. It's also Montana. It's also Missouri. It's also Florida. It's also Texas. The list goes on and on. Donald Trump told a big lie that has led to a assault on democracy in the Capitol on January 6th. The assaults we're seeing going on now in state capitals with the legislatures may be less deadly, and be less violent, but they are every bit as damaging to our democracy.
It is so disconcerting, but what is, I think, keeping me feeling positive is that there are so many awesome pro-democracy warriors out there all over the country that are fighting, that are organized, like Mark Elias, like Stacey Abrams, so many great journalists covering this so that we can see it happening in real time, like Ari Berman and Greg Sargent and so many others. But I mean, these bills that we're seeing across the country absolutely do represent the most sustained effort to roll back access to the ballot in Georgia since the Jim Crow era. And that we are not going to stop paying attention to and fighting. Okay, let's move on here. In the last 24, we heard from Congressman Tim Ryan and Katie Porter. I want to play both of them for you. But after listening to Republicans take aim at legislation that would help organize labor, the Ohio Democrat, Congressman Tim Ryan, he's my second episode guest, I think, here on the podcast. He let all those Republicans know that he'd had about enough of their preoccupation with stoking these stupid, ridiculous culture wars while American workers are suffering in this unprecedented pandemic. Here's Tim Ryan letting loose on the House floor.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, this is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years. And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields.
All right, Tim Ryan on fire. More of that from Democrats, I think, would be good. That kind of performance, and that's what it is effective, as is Congresswoman Katie Porter, who is always on point. When yesterday, as part of the Natural Resources Committee hearing, she was talking to an executive of an oil company who told me that she was wrong. She says, he told me I had a misconception about a special tax break that polluters get that other businesses don't. And this is kind of convoluted. You may not understand the kind of financial rhetoric. I didn't necessarily hear. I mean, I couldn't follow along with it. But listen to Katie Porter talk to this oil executive. And she's just such a boss, and she's just toying with him, and she sets him up, throws the ball up, and just knocks it out of the park. Katie Porter, Congresswoman from California.
They're estimated to be between 60 to 90% of the cost of drilling. How much of those intangible drilling costs do you get to deduct right away from your taxes?
We get to deduct all of those just like any other business. We do not.
How much do you get to deduct?
There seems to be a misconception out there that you're operating from, that somehow the oil and gas industry benefits from some special sort of tax structure. We don't. We actually.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Murphy.
Other industries, right?
I will follow up with you, Mr. Murphy, but you do benefit from special rules. There's a special tax rule for intangible drilling costs that does not apply to other kinds of expenses that businesses have. You get to deduct 70% of your costs immediately, and other businesses have to amortize their expenses over their entire profit stream.
We also
so please don't patronize me by telling me that the oil and gas industry doesn't have any special tax provisions. Because if you would like that to be the rule, I would be happy to have Congress deliver. I yield back.
All right, Katie Porter, such a boss. She is on Twitter, by the way, at Rep Katie Porter. I really should reach out to her and Tim Ryan and several other Congress folks and get them on the show. Shouldn't be too hard. All right, moving on. Let's talk. Let's play some Jen Psaki. She's the president's spokeswoman, and I just saw a couple clips, wanted to grab them and share them with you because I thought they were interesting and also ridiculous. But this first clip is, I think, interesting in that I think it's CNN's Kate Collins asking Jen Psaki, Joe Biden's spokeswoman, if Joe Biden would be signing the stimulus checks, the aid checks that he is going to be signing the bill on. Would he be signing the actual check like Donald Trump did?
On whether or not he wants his signature on there like former President Trump demanded?
Well, we are doing everything in our power to expedite the payments and not delay them, which is why the president's name will not appear on the memo line of this round of stimulus checks. The checks will be signed by a career official at the Bureau of Fiscal Service. This is not about him. This is about the American people getting relief, almost 160 million of them.
So he did not want his name to appear on the checks?
He didn't think that was a priority or a necessary step. His focus was on getting them out as quickly as possible.
And then this other moment, just to show you the ridiculousness of why this is a New York Post reporter. So, I mean, therein lies the answer, but also how little is going on or how little scandal there is with Joe Biden. I just read a statistic that Joe Biden has been mentioned like 1,000 times or something in media versus at this point, Trump like 4,000 times. Those numbers are wrong, but it was like fourfold. And why is that? It's because Donald Trump was constantly injecting himself into our lives and constantly surrounded by scandal and new things over and over. And Joe Biden is not putting himself in the middle and tweeting and causing scandal all day. So they have to ask about his dog.
Can you clarify for us what happened with the president's dogs? There's some reports that one of them was involved in a biting incident. Can you clarify exactly what happened?
Sure. Champion Major, the president and first lady's dogs, members of the family, are still getting acclimated and accustomed to their new surroundings and new people. And on Monday, the first family's younger dog, Major, was surprised by an unfamiliar person and reacted in a way that resulted in a minor injury to the individual, which was handled by the White House medical unit with no further treatment needed. It had been previously planned already for the dogs to be cared for by family friends in Delaware during Dr. Biden's travels to military bases this week. She has a 3-day trip this week, and the dogs will return to the White House soon.
Can you confirm that it was a Secret Service member who was bitten? And can you also reassure the public that Major Biden will not be euthanized as a result of this?
Well, certainly Major Biden is a member of the family, so I can assure you that. I don't have any more details on the individual. I would encourage you to ask the Secret Service, but I'm not going to have any more details other than that.
We were promised a White House cat. What happened to that?
Where is the cat? Today's a good day for the cat. I don't have any update on the cat. We know the cat will break the internet, but I don't have any update on its status.
Jen Psaki. She's great. Okay, and now here's my congressman. Mondaire Jones is his name. He's just elected. He's a freshman, and he's come out of the gates running full force. He is a black, gay, Harvard-educated lawyer. I like him a lot. And he is really fired up about voting rights. And as Congress prepares to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, hopefully later this year, he went on the House floor and said this about the very important anniversary this week.
56 years ago, 600 peaceful protesters, led by the late John Lewis, prepared to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the right to vote. On the other side stood Sheriff Jim Clark and his armed patrolmen, ready to stop them. The protesters marched on. Clark and his troopers put on their gas masks, blasted the marchers with tear gas, and then brutally beat them with billy clubs and cattle prods. Some of Clark's men mounted their horses and charged into the crowd, trampling protesters while unleashing the rebel yell. They beat John Lewis so hard they broke his skull. He and dozens of his fellow marchers were hospitalized. 5 months after Bloody Sunday, Congress enacted the Voting Rights Act. And as we remember Bloody Sunday, let us also recognize the Jim Clarks who blocked the bridge to democracy today. 5 decades after Bloody Sunday, the Supreme Court struck down the heart of the Voting Rights Act in a decision in 2013 called Shelby. And as we commemorate our first Bloody Sunday without John Lewis, Republicans in Georgia have passed a new law cracking down on the right to vote. So today, as we answer John's call to cross the bridge to democracy once again, let us hope that no Supreme Court justices stand in our way on the other side. And if they do, may we, like our ancestors, march on.
All right. Come on, Mondaire. You could have delivered that a little bit better, a little bit more kind of inflection on the right word and stuff. But he'll get it. He's good. He's super, super smart, and I like him a lot, and I thought that was great. And now, with really no segue, here is Neil deGrasse Tyson. This went viral yesterday. He's on apparently TikTok, but I saw this on Twitter, with a poignant 30 seconds on states removing mandatory mask mandates. But basically, he's saying that Texas is the peeing section of the United States of America.
if most states in the United States of America have retained their mask-wearing rules to protect everyone from COVID, and some states have relaxed that rule, allowing people to walk around without it in public, that's like designating a peeing section of a swimming pool.
Well done, Neil deGrasse Tyson. And finally, last clip I want to play for you here from the last 24 hours, of course, is of Piers Morgan walking off the set on Good Morning Britain. Later on, either he quit or he was fired. But the statement was, following discussions with ITV, Piers Morgan has decided now is the time to leave Good Morning Britain. So apparently he quit Good Morning. It doesn't really matter. What matters is how many times I've watched this video of apparently the guy who does the weather on this show, Good Morning Britain, Alex Beresford, articulately defending Harry and Meghan, condemning Piers Morgan's treatment of them, and then you just hear him walk off.
What has happened with Prince Harry in this situation? He walked behind his mother's coffin at a tender age in front of the globe. That is going to shape a young boy for the rest of his life. So I think that we need to all take a step back. And I understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this programme. A number of times. And I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan Markle, or had one, and she cut you off. She's entitled to cut you off if she wants to. Has she said anything about you since she cut you off? I don't think she has, but yet you continue to trash her.
OK, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no. Sorry.
Do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, maybe, not my...
No.
See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't do this.
This is absolutely diabolical behaviour. I'm sorry, but Piers spouts off on a regular basis, and we all have to sit there and listen. 6:30 to 7 o'clock yesterday was incredibly hard to watch.
A very powerful statement right there, and he later tweeted, Alex Beresford, I wish I had the privilege to sit on the fence. In order for me to do that, I would have had to strip myself of my identity, and that's not something I can do. It's not any of our places to pick apart claims of racism in order to make us feel more comfortable. How was that? Not bad? All right, that is it for the last 24-hour in sound. Let's get now to the news dump, and Pete Coe sent in a new jingle today. Take it away, Pete.
Angry chimpanzee leaves a man's arm a stump. These stories and more on today's news dump.
What? Okay, thank you, Pete. I love it. Very good. I don't actually have a story about an angry chimpanzee. Maybe I should make one up. But thank you. That's Pete Coe. Send your news dump jingles to standuppwithpete@gmail.com. All right. Not COVID, not politics. It's a news dump. Let's start with Disney, where the story is that Disney Plus has stripped its children's movie selection of classic movies like Dumbo, The Aristocrats, and Peter Pan because of their racist stereotypes, apparently. On the Stories Matter section of their website, Disney explained why each iconic movie was being pulled, and it's pretty interesting, and I highly recommend that story and digging into it, not reacting to it. Bloomberg News reporting that a group of hackers say they breached a massive trove of security camera data collected by Silicon Valley startup called Verkada Incorporated, gaining access to live feeds of 150,000 surveillance cameras inside hospitals, companies, police departments, prisons, and schools. Company's footage was exposed to include carmaker Tesla Incorporated and software provider Cloudflare. And read more about this scary hack at Bloomberg, finance.yahoo.com. It's actually Bloomberg reporting, though. Mass layoffs hit Huffington Post. Now that it's been acquired by BuzzFeed, just 3 weeks after finalizing the deal to buy HuffPost, BuzzFeed is taking a buzzsaw to the left-leaning news and culture site, according to the New York Post. Some great reporters looking for work right now. Really sad story. The NBA All-Star Game got the lowest ratings ever. No surprise there. A meteor exploded over Vermont and caused tremors in Vermont. I actually texted my buddy up there. I got a lot of friends who live in Vermont, and he said he didn't feel anything, but he did hear it. The meteor, or he didn't hear it. He did feel it. Forgive me, Chris Anderson, if you're listening. Thanks. The meteor that exploded over the state of Vermont on the last night was detected by ground-based seismometers. The space rock violently broke apart in Earth's atmosphere around 33 miles high, causing a shockwave that could be measured and heard by instruments. Feels like a good story. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos said he's planning to spend $10 billion that he invested in the Bezos Earth Fund by 2030, according to the fund's new CEO. I'm going to have to ask Emily Atkin and other climate reporters about what they think of that investment. It sounds like a lot, but is it? And finally, this story for you. A longtime Amtrak employee has been charged with stealing and selling more than $50,000 worth of chainsaws and parts from the railroad. Jose Rodriguez sold the items for more than $50,000 between 2016 and July 2020, according to the complaint. The 48-year-old New Jersey resident had worked at Amtrak's North Brunswick facility since 2007. Whew, what a racket. Selling chainsaws. He sold 77 chainsaws, 103 chainsaw replacement, and more parts. You know what? I need a chainsaw. I wish I would have bumped into Jose because I'm in the market. If anybody has any suggestions, please send them that my way right now. And that is the News Dump. Send your News Dump suggestions my way as well. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, let me now get to my first guest of the show today. She's always a hit when she joins me. We go way back and always have a great conversation. She is a political commentator and a columnist. You may have seen her on any of the major cable news networks over the years, from Fox to MSNBC. She's now at CNN. She is also the winner of Jeopardy! I think it was like a celebrity Jeopardy! Contest, or was it News People? I forget. But she is on Twitter and all social media at SE Cupp. She's a columnist at the Daily News, and we always have a great conversation. We talked about several different issues, CPAC and Cuomo. But what I love most was her first response here when I basically was like, how are you? And she voiced everything I feel about how overwhelming social media can be. Maybe it's just people like her and I who are kind of content creators and co-influencers and people who spend a lot of time producing tweets and things, videos and everything on social media. Maybe you don't feel this way as someone who's more of a buyer of it and viewer of it, but certainly I just loved that this is what she said at the beginning. Here now, my conversation with S.E. Cupp, and after that, coming up, Dr. Henry Raymond of Rutgers University, who's an epidemiologist, will talk to me about the CDC guidelines. But here it is, S.E. Cupp, right now. Excited to see you and talk to you, and how are you?
I'm well. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like I'm getting a little overwhelmed by social media, and this comes in waves. And I go through these moments where I think social media is so great and I figured it out and I'm like the master of my universe on social media, right? And I'm like, I rule it and I can control it, and then I go through times where I'm like, oh my God, it's about to ruin my life. It's 5 seconds of ruining my life. And that's what I'm going through right now. I'm in that dip of like, I might need to quit it all. But I'm sure, again, it'll come in, another wave will come where I crest and I'm again master of my domain. So that's how I am. The short answer is I'm fine.
That is so great to hear. And I don't know if everybody, listening can relate to it because they might be more of a watcher than a tweeter and a kind of the way you and I might talk about mastering it. But I'm so glad that you just said that. It was very cathartic for me to hear, because while I don't ever really feel like I'm great at it, I think you're really good at it. But even when I think I get a hit, then it's nothing, or it's just sad, a lot of sadness and frustration. It leads me to your tweet, which, and I'd like to, speaking of social media, do a segment now called S.E. Cupp's Tweets, where we elaborate on some of your tweets. You roped me in. It was you and maybe two others who on Sunday night roped me in, but it was your tweet specifically, because I knew finally what it was about, that said, my God, this interview is fire. I just realized my heart was racing. And when you wrote that, I was like, okay, that's it. What is happening? And I went over and I checked it out. So what do you want to say, given, 3 days to digest this, why it might be an important thing for us to discuss, or what your conclusions are from it?
Well, let me say, I've never been a royal watcher. I don't care all that much about the royals. I didn't watch The Crown. I don't remember where I was when Diana died or someone got married, it just didn't matter that much to me. So I watched because everyone was watching, and I kind of just wanted to know what people were talking about, not because I had any vested interest in like the monarchy. But combination of things, Oprah's so good. She just sits down, asks a question, the interview goes, and she just kind of goes with it. And so you're just on this journey with her. And then two, I have never heard someone speak that honestly and critically from inside the monarchy, and about how terrible it was and all the things she went through. And it just felt very revealing. And I didn't even know how revealing, but I definitely knew it was revealing. And I don't know, I was on the edge of my seat. I truly at some point felt my heart going, and I was like, this is crazy. And I can't believe it sustained me for 2 full hours, but like I could have done two hours more.
Was it a 2-hour interview? I only saw clips.
Yes. It was 2 full hours. And I couldn't believe it when I realized it was 2 hours. And then at the end, I was like, oh, give me more.
Just one unimportant but speculative question. You would be a person who would know, not necessarily the answer to this question, but do you think, because you're a media person, a journalist, but do you think that Oprah had do you think there were preconditions in any way to that interview?
She sat down, you'd know this if you watched it, Pete.
Sorry.
She sat down and said, and so I guess if we believe her, she said, there were no preconditions. You didn't ask me to not ask any questions. We have not talked about this before. So I have to, look, Oprah's friendly with them. So I have to imagine she probably wasn't gonna, be overly pushy, but she pushed back a number of times, especially around some of the claims where they talked about money and not being able to afford stuff. I mean, she was all of us when she was like, what? Come on. But listen, it was the claims that it was friendly. I understand because she's clearly sympathetic to Meghan and Harry. But I know she's also friendly with the royals. And so I imagine it was hard for her to hear a lot of the things that Meghan and Harry were saying.
All right. Anything else about that interview that we need to really discuss? Did you see the Piers Morgan stuff and him storming off? Do you know him?
I did. I do know Piers. I mean, he's just a consummate baby. And, he is not the first baby to make a living being a baby on television. And I do think he's actually a really good interview. And I had been on his show many times when he was at CNN, but I do think he's got pretty thin skin. And, if you want to go that hard against a woman who just admitted she had been contemplating suicide and had just revealed that she'd been the victim of racism and tabloid trash and had really gone through depression and stuff, if you want to go that hard at her, you better be able to take the criticism. Yeah. When you do, and to storm off your job like that. I mean, there's a dozen of those guys in my business.
Have you ever stormed off of the set?
No, please. I'm a mother. Please. No.
Well, I mean, it does. It speaks of like cowardice in a way. It's a weird thing. It's your show. Who walks up?
Your job is to complete a thought. Your job is to finish a sentence. Your job is to give your opinion. Storming off is literally like abdicating your responsibilities.
I just thought of just walking out of the shed on you right now, but I was like, it's not worth it.
Maybe I'll during this interview.
I didn't think it was worth it if I don't post the video. And I just don't have the emotions to do it. And I don't want to get out of my chair. So sticking with your tweets real quick, we're going to get to some really deep stuff, including your recent columns and more important things, Women's International Women's History Day and month and a lot. But speaking of which, the Burger King tweet, Burger King yesterday tweeted something like women should be in the kitchen. And then they quickly followed up with what we meant was, there's the percentage of women that are in the kitchen is the chefs, and we want to make more opportunity, and please don't cancel us. But my point is anybody seeing that? I talked about it yesterday, Essie, and saying, you know what? I'm not going to Burger King anymore. Is there a Venn diagram of the principled?
No. And if you do, you're also a baby. Right. Burger King is delicious. But no, I'm curious what you thought of it as a comedian.
I just thought it was I mean, I missed the joke. I was like, what? There's no context here. That's a sexist trope without context. In context, it could be hilarious if you wrapped it in the right kind of irony, but you don't just write that tweet alone and have everybody on social media react to it. But I will say this. If Burger King is right next to Wendy's, that might be the deciding factor.
Sure. For like 5 minutes, then you get over it.
Yeah, I want to try that Impossible Burger. I still haven't had the veggie burger. Anyway, all right. So another tweet of yours that I wanted to, now we get a little bit more serious references. I just retweeted this because I know 3 of these journalists that you share, but you retweeted pictures of these 4 journalists who I'm sure you know well because you work with them at CNN. To celebrate, now I can't find a quote, the tweet, their work in journalism and conflict journalism specifically. Let me just elaborate a little bit about what you know about women doing conflict journalism and why you did that.
Well, I've covered foreign policy for a long time, and I've, at times when no one really wanted me to, right? Because it just doesn't do as well as domestic news does. Right. And yet it's so important. And so, I've covered Syria for now 10 years. I've been to war zones. I went to a conflict border, in Western Africa to cover terrorism in the Maghreb. And I've always had this sense of awe for the women, especially who do that on a regular basis. Because not only is it very dangerous and harrowing, it's doubly dangerous for women in a lot of these places. So for people like Christiane Amanpour and Clarissa Ward and Arwa Damon and Gail Lemon, who go to these horrific places to tell often what are horrific stories that are so important, and give up families. They give up, a lot of their safety at times. They give up lives back home for months on end to do it. And obviously there are men who do it too, but I feel like it's a little different for women. I'm just immensely grateful and awe-inspired. I didn't have the courage to do that for my career. I sit from a very nice desk, in New York City and now at my house. I risk nothing almost, to do what I do. And so to me, they're just the top of the pinnacle of heroism to me. And so I want to honor them for doing the job I didn't have the courage to do.
Arwa Damon has this great nonprofit too, INARA, International Network for Aid, Relief, and Assistance. And you wrote, these women are my heroes. They courageously cover the stories over there, stories of war, oppression, genocide, famine, displacement, equally of hope and triumph. They go to places most won't tell these important stories because there's no such thing as over there. And let me just ask you one more follow-up about that in terms of why these, I guess it's pretty natural for foreign policy issues. It's not uniquely American to not get as much attention. I suppose our issues get more attention than the rest of the world because of who America has been. But I'm so fascinated by foreign policy and history and geopolitics. And I'm binging Madam Secretary. I may be the only one. But why do you think they don't get, aren't as interesting? Can't you dress them up and do segments on them on American cable news networks pretty well?
Oh, I try. Believe me. I mean, I try, and I talk to members of Congress and members of the media all the time. What are the ways we can make Americans care more about Syrian genocide, a genocide that's happening before our very eyes on social media? We have videos. It's not like World War II where we need war reporters to bring back footage. We can watch it happening live. 50,000 children have been slaughtered in some of the most horrific ways with chemical attacks. 500,000 people are dead. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that we don't have time for that. And we can't see the national security implications. We can't see the humanitarian implications. We can't see economic implications of 11 million displaced people around the world. I mean, there are many reasons why we should care about all of these stories. That the, Rohingya story is another, the Uyghurs in China. And it's just hard. And I am sympathetic to people who say, listen, I've got enough going on. Yep. There's a lot going on here. We're dealing with a lot.
Yep.
It is a big ask to say, okay, but could you just give 5 minutes for these people over there? But, it doesn't stop me from trying. I'll never stop trying to tell those stories.
Yeah, it's with COVID and Trump especially. I just started doing like a separate news segment every day where it's not COVID and it's not politics or Trump. I mean, a lot of these foreign policy stories do come up, but you've been on this for a long time and bringing attention to it in every way you can, including on social media. And it's super important. One of the easiest things, though, that America could do is allow refugees from Syria to come into the United States. And I find it to be the most reprehensible of sins for this country over the past several years. And I mean, I think it's mostly because conservative Republicans are terrified of the people in their district being, just terrified of these refugees. They think, these horrible narratives that they're somehow terrorists when they're actually starving and terrified. And that's what America is supposed to be. So couldn't that be something that the Biden administration easily changes?
And they have. The Biden administration has already lifted caps on refugees and are specifically targeting Syrian refugees to raise those levels. We used to admit in the Obama administration quite a high number of Syrian refugees, which frankly was the least that administration could do. And then Trump, as you know, sort of turned the nozzle off.
And it's crazy. I just want to jump in here because I remember learning this, and you, of course, wrote a whole book about religion, and it's just wild. But that most of the refugee resettlement agencies in the United States and around the world are actually religious and specifically Christian based in America, and so they've been appalled by that. And I think the right. I don't know how you can explain that or untangle who is who, but if the religious right is anti-refugee, but all of the refugee organizations are also religious. How do you connect those dots?
I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy and inconsistencies that I see. And as you know, I'm sympathetic to religious America. But there's a lot of inconsistencies, intellectual dishonesty and hypocrisy among the religious right, and specifically evangelicals. I can't explain their love of Trump. I can't explain how they excused a lot of what he and his administration did to the very people, the most vulnerable people that they claim to, want to protect. I can't explain it.
Do you understand the grievance of many on the religious right that say that they are being persecuted and they're not able to practice their religious liberty? Because I have no sympathy for those things. Maybe we can argue. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think anyone is unable to practice their religion. And as you mentioned, I wrote a book about how Christian America is, in some senses, under attack, and mostly the lens that I see that through for that book is by the media, and I think the media largely misunderstands religion, and specifically Christian Americans. The media can be condescending to Christians. The media doesn't represent, doesn't have a lot of religious people inside of it, and we used to have religion beats at major newspapers. We don't have those anymore. So I'm sympathetic to that. But the Constitution allows for the open practice of religion and religious freedom, and that hasn't changed. So I think a lot of it is some, outrage culture that exists on the left and the right to, make villains of liberals and the left.
I want to talk with you about women in general. It's International Women's Month. It's Women's History Day was yesterday. The Day of the Woman. March is supposed to be there's a lot of different things that are happening to celebrate and help women, reach equity and all kinds of things. And I'm not sure exactly which question I want to ask you, because we can talk about women in media. We can talk about the modern day feminist movement and so on. But let me just get right to how your comments the other night that I played on the podcast, because I thought they were so eloquent and passionate about Andrew Cuomo as a way to talk about kind of where we're at with equity, with sexual harassment, the Me Too movement. What are your thoughts on these allegations, these accusations? Every single situation is different.
Yeah.
But what do you make of now? How many women have come forward? At least 3 that by my count, which is such a flippant thing to say.
I think it's up to 5. Look, I think a couple of things. I think he's, like a lot of powerful guys, defiant and, saying he's not going anywhere, while also pretending to apologize. So I think we can, number one is we can say his apology is not sincere. If he were really sorry, he would take measures to rectify his behavior, which would include leaving your position of power, leaving your perch, which you abused for the past however many years. And whether you believe you did it intentionally doesn't really matter. You did. You abused your position by his own admission, right? He's admitting to having said or done some of the things that he's accused of. He said he was joking, or he's being misinterpreted, which is infuriating. And any woman who's been the subject of comments like that at work has heard this excuse. You can't take a joke, calm down, relax. You're confused. You're misinterpreting me.
Well, one of the things he said,
we are not confused.
One of the things he specifically said, sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to get you to your answer on this was, I never inappropriately touched anyone. And that's open to interpretation. I really think it is. If I watch someone touch you, I could decide my opinion is if that was inappropriate. But if I touched you or if you touched me, I'm the one who gets to decide whether or not it's appropriate. I think that, frankly, specifically, the only time I can ever think of like any kind of touching of a woman is being at like a funeral, a woman that I work with or something, like someone that we lost, or we're at work and something terrible happens in the news and some kind of comforting like that where human touches. But other than that, like it's up to you to decide whether it's appropriate or inappropriate is my point.
And I wrote about that in a piece for CNN. I was at work once and climbing into a van with a group to go to a location for a shoot, and a very prominent male anchor behind me put both of his hands on my butt. Excuse me. And I turned around horrified, and he said, I didn't want you to fall out, and laughed. And a lot of people around me laughed as well. My colleagues laughed.
Was it Tom Brokaw?
No. And he laughed it off. And I wrote about it because you don't get to decide whether you were joking. Right. I get to decide whether that was a joke and whether it was funny. And it was obviously not appropriate. But that scenario happens all the time. And it has this really insidious way when men do this in public, right? When men sexually harass or assault women in private and clandestine, then it's sinister. It's obvious. When it happens in public, in earshot of your colleagues, it has the effect of making you think, as the woman or male victim, well, he's doing it in front of other people. It must not be that bad. Or am I the only one who thought that was awful? Why isn't anyone else saying how awful that was? And it makes you doubt, whether that was okay. And then you think, well, gosh, if I'm going to tell someone, maybe they'll have the same reaction, that it wasn't so bad. So, and that's a lot of what Governor Cuomo is accused of, doing stuff like this in front of other people. And I know that behavior. I've seen that behavior. And just because he was brazen about it doesn't make it any better.
How come you don't name that person's name? You don't, I mean, it's up to you, right? It's always up to the person to decide what, how they want to deal with that. Do you have any judgment, either way, for someone who is in a situation like that it happens, that they should, what they should do? Because as you wrote, and as you've talked about, so many women don't say anything for several different reasons.
It is. Everyone has their own lines, and I have told on people before. And others I haven't.
I don't like told on. That makes it sound childish. You've brought people to justice at work.
Yeah, right. Yes.
He grabbed my ass. Oh, calm down. Like when it says told us.
I'm telling on you. No, you're right. I've exposed or reported.
Yeah.
People. Others I have not. And I did not create this system. I have to work inside of it, and I want to keep my job.
Right.
And I'm not saying my current job, wherever I was at the time, whatever. I wanted to keep my job, and that really sucks to have to be a calculation, but it is a calculation still. And you and I, Pete, know many of the women who came out against Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly at Fox. We know them.
Yeah.
None of them have the jobs they had when they called these people out. And that is a constant reminder to me that it still is not safe. As much as we've glorified these women and honored them and we call them brave and courageous, which is all the right thing to do, we have still not made it safe for us to tell and keep our jobs and not become Bill O'Reilly victim number 4 for the rest of our lives. That will be the justice when I can actually name this person and the dozens of others and know I'm going to keep my job. People are still going to treat me the same. I'm not going to be viewed by future employers as a troublemaker, as difficult.
Because your diamond dozen. You aren't. I mean, you were mentioned like every meeting I've ever been. Why don't we get SC Cupp? All right, enough. Okay, we get it. I mean, but I mean, the point is, you can get labeled as being difficult, and it's easy to go with somebody else as a result of that, and that's terrible because it should be something that you value. Actually, if your reputation is currency, we want people who turn other people in. You know, I heard this story once. I wonder if this, if you've heard this kind of thing, and I don't know that this definitely happened. It's not a big deal, but it's a weird trick. Executive at SiriusXM says to a much younger, newer woman, had just started working there. A bunch of us are going out later if you want to join. So she joins and no one else shows up. I don't know where everybody is. And it's those types of
happens.
Like, I think a lot of people will see that right away, but some young people will just totally fall for them. Like, oh, where's everybody? And then he goes on to manipulate the situation. And that's the kind of thing that I don't know how you create awareness around that, whether it's an HR workshop or whatever, but it seems to me that is the kind of trickery and mischief and harassment that should never be allowed.
It's not so much that they fall for it. We know we have really good instincts. Another one is can we just meet in my hotel room? I don't have time to meet you at a restaurant or a public place. Can you just come to the hotel room so we can do it quickly?
I did that once. But she invited me, as SiriusXM, she invited me to her hotel room to smoke pot while we were in Denver covering the pot fair, the marijuana, the cannabis circus, whatever it was. So it was like not that, but I remember now, and that nothing weird happened, but I remember before even going in, I was like, I shouldn't go into this woman's room. She knows I'm married. She was in a relationship, but I remember still going, what am I doing? But I was like, I want to smoke that pot is what I'm doing.
Right.
Like I wasn't.
That's where I was going. Like, it's not that we fall for it. We know what's going on, but we want whatever opportunity might come out of it. Or we feel like we can't back out of it because we'll lose opportunities, or they'll suddenly be afraid of us and they won't want to book us or use us or whatever. It's very fraught. It's very fraught.
Lots more that I want to talk with you about, but you have a really interesting piece at the Daily News about, I don't know how to describe what it's about. Let me just read the title. Elite pedigrees are normal for the right's phony populists. And you're calling out several specific people who have Ivy League degrees, maybe more than one. And what I wanted to ask you is how you approach this, because as I was getting ready to talk to you today, I was on your About section on your website, and either I didn't know or I forgot that you went to Cornell.
Yeah.
Well,
I have several degrees. I also have a master's.
Yeah, a master's from NYU, right? What is your master's in?
Faith studies.
What?
Faith studies.
Oh, I thought you said fake studies. I was like,
oh, wouldn't that be great?
What major? You study conspiracy? So what do you bring? It's not like you're gonna. I don't think you threw that in the column. And by the way, I should know I went to Cornell, but I've never taught you about it. And I actually just wanted to ask you. You know, as someone who still identifies, I think is certainly leaning conservative. Hard to know what these labels even mean anymore. But what was it like for you to be at Cornell? What was your Cornell experience like?
I loved it. I was obsessed with it. I, worked really hard to get in, and I loved it, mostly because I started working at the school paper, and that became my education and more important than any classes I took. And I worked there I was only there 3 years because I graduated a year early, Pete. But
I graduated right on time. 2 years. Yeah, with my associates.
I got you.
I brag.
But I worked at the paper for all 3 years that I was there, and ended up being editor of the arts section. And that's when I knew, when I knew what I wanted to do. And so I loved it. But the point I make is you can have an Ivy League degree and be well educated and still criticize the left for perceived elitisms, for some, decadence, or that you can do that. The populism bothers me. The phony populism bothers me when it's in service of a guy like Trump. When you're pretending that you like Americans more than liberals and Democrats, you care more about real Americans.
Oh, I hate it. Nothing triggers me more than real Americans.
Say that when you're supporting a guy who hates Americans, who has lied to half the country, the half that likes him, by the way, and has threatened violence and incited violence against the other half. You don't get to say you love America more than anyone else when you're supporting that asshole. So that was my point. The Josh Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes and the Pete Hegseths with all their fancy degrees pretending they speak real America and no one else does is just so offensive because of what they actually do support.
To me, real America are the states that I like. And it may surprise you with a couple of them, but those are the real Americans to me. The states that I like. And that really is what all of this, even patriotism, like words like that, it's the things and the people and the ideas that I like about America are real American. It's like, no, it's not. It's fucking messy as hell is what it is.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
We have the most diverse. That's why we have such a hard time with democracy, I think. We're so diverse culturally, ethnically, socioeconomically. There's so many different types of realities. That's why there is no real America.
No, and the patriot porn is just so tired to me, and it just reeks of hypocrisy and sort of ad hominem, I'm better than you are and I like America more. It's just so silly and inauthentic. And I think we bought it for a long time when the right people, the quote unquote right people were saying it. And now it just looks so cheap.
I've always felt like the people who appreciate America the most are the people who have lived or come from elsewhere. Because they have a perspective. Like, how do I really even know? I grew up in New York State. I can't tell you shit about Oregon. Nothing. I don't know anything about it. I don't know what to tell you if Oregon's great or not. I've never been there.
Well, yeah, and speak to a Cuban American or a Vietnamese American who came over.
I will not.
You can't
not
make
on
me.
This program. But I will talk to a Cuban Vietnamese. Yeah, a refugee. Talk to somebody who has had a deep perspective and struggled. And I think that's really, well said. Sorry to interrupt with dumb jokes.
I love your dumb jokes.
Okay, thank you. So finally,
yeah,
CPAC.
Okay.
Was that a Nazi symbol or not, that stage?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Thank you for that.
Honestly, seems too well thought out for them.
Yeah.
But I have no idea. And it's mind boggling that I wouldn't put that past anyone, but I that's mind-boggling. But I don't know.
More importantly, you wrote and talked about CPAC as well. And you mentioned Trump and how he doesn't like it. I mean, there's this story that just came out, which is so important. He's telling everybody not to give any money to any other Republican or conservative super PAC or political organization. He put out a statement, send all of your money just to me. Yeah. And my question was, when I was thinking about that last night, is what are you going to do with it? What are you? You're not going to help anybody get elected with.
No, he's going to keep it. Like he's going to line his own pockets. I mean, it's just a continual grift. But people fall for it. People will do it. It blows my mind.
So what is the platform now? What did you make of CPAC? You had a lot of, you made fun of it a lot by talking about the panels that were there. And I thought that was important because people need to know.
Those weren't jokes. Those weren't punchlines. Those were real panels.
Fair enough.
I didn't make fun of it. I listed them.
Sorry, that was my interpretation, that just the listing of these was poking fun at them. That was what I heard. But you're right.
No, I didn't. I didn't have to. Look, I used to go to CPAC.
Me too.
A lot. Yeah, I know. I'd see you on Radio Row.
3 or 4 times. The Gaylord.
Oh, I was going back when it was at the Omni.
I only went when it was at the Gaylord. That was a contractual.
Yeah.
I like to be.
It used to be at the Omni. And, I went for years. I went to sell my books, to network, to do Radio Row, to see friends, all that stuff, and to speak on panels. And I think one year, someone wrote that I was the most ubiquitous person at CPAC because I was on 4 different panels. I really loved it. It was fun. But the panels we used to, were fiscal responsibility and, privacy and limited government stuff. And this year was just a buffet of buffoonery with, everything, 19 panels on China, 19 panels on election fraud and spreading the big lie. And it just seemed like the smallest of tents, not what we used to be the big tent where we'd have the Ron Paul people over in this corner, right? And the deficit hawks over here and the war hawks over here. And, everyone would do the straw poll and it was nerdy, but great because we were talking about issues, real, actual issues. And I didn't see any real issues there. It was just sort of a mockery of conservatism.
So much about
Donald Trump wanted to talk about.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head, and it was interesting to hear some analysis of, we just passed this rescue bill for $2 trillion, and strangely, conservative Republicans weren't out there trashing it and making, certainly weren't making real counter proposals, but they were actually distracting and talking about these other things. And I wonder what's been lost there. But more importantly, I wonder what you think of the conversation about cancel culture, because I think, fine, I'll have it. I'll talk about it. There's some things worth talking about. But I think, as you mentioned earlier, people who are trying to, make ends meet and who are struggling anyway are not worried about being, quote, canceled. And by the way, most people, you and I, because of the industry that we're in, know people who have, quote, been canceled. But most people aren't thinking about that or know anybody who's been, quote, canceled. So my point is, if it's an issue, it's number 25.
It's not an issue. Let's just say right there, it's not an issue. Dr. Seuss removing 6 of its own books on their own volition is not an issue. That's not an issue that's going to hurt anyone. Mr. Potato Head still being available, by the way. Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head still available. An additional potato head that's gender neutral hurts no one. This does not affect anyone's lives. Full stop. But the side dish that always came with populism and conservatism and right-wing media outrage is now it's the entree. It's all that's being served. As you mentioned, they're not out there talking about a $2 trillion bill, which, by the way, has some issues. You can support it generally and still point at some of the flaws, maybe. Or reining in the debt and the deficit that ballooned under Trump. Remember these things we used to care about. Now the outrage stuff, the culture wars, the dumbest of culture wars, are the main dish. It's what you go for. And it's really sad because it is a distraction. As you say, people are trying to make ends meet. People are also dying, right? Let's not forget, people are still dying from a global pandemic that we have not solved yet. So it just seems like it's not issue 29. It's non-issue. It's a non-issue.
Interesting to hear you say that. And I couldn't agree more on it. Well, do you know when, what's your track on being vaccinated? When do you qualify?
I believe
is that a personal question? Oh, should we not ask people in public, much less on a podcast like this, hey, have you been vaccinated? It may be personal. It may be none of my business.
It is. Yeah, maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, because the vax conversation generally is controversial. So maybe we don't ask that. I don't know. But I'm happy to answer your question. I think I'm slated for the end of April in Connecticut. But, it's been a shifting day. It's mostly been shifting up earlier because things are going well here.
I mainly ask because I'm asking people around my age-ish or that look to me to not necessarily have a comorbidity. That's why it's like it could be personal. It's like, listen, I've got to get it because I have a thing with a gastrointestinal.
Right.
Whatever. And I'm like, oh, boy. But I'm asking it because I feel like I've not been paying attention. And the reason I haven't been paying attention is because I work in a shed. Uh-huh. And my body is a temple, so my BMI is perfect.
Oh, okay. So you're not worried.
I'm worried. I just feel like I don't have any real reason to get it for a long time. So I haven't done the proper research to look into it. My parents just
leave the house.
What's that?
Do your kids ever leave the house?
Yeah.
Okay. So you could.
I could, but I still feel like, I don't know, there's got to be other people who see more people who leave their shed and have a gut.
I hear you. I feel the same way. We're really safe. We've been gone nowhere. We've been really good. My kid school's at home, but I'm anxious to get it. I want to get it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. My wife just got shot number 1 because she sees people, because she goes to homes and sees people. And it's very interesting. And my parents got it. And I don't know if you have, loved ones who have been vaccinated, but it's a weird thing that you're not expecting to feel. Like when my wife got shot number 1, and she told me, I wasn't expecting it. She goes, done. And I looked at the text and I started crying. I wasn't expecting to. I was like, oh, I'm so happy. You're safe. Same thing with my parents. Have you felt that?
Well, total relief. I mean, yeah, I think we kind of got used to the current situation, which we had to, right? That was a survival.
As used to it as we could. Yeah.
We had to. But yeah, I think that sudden relief of like, oh my God, we might have normalcy again. Yeah, it's a huge relief. I can't wait.
Covered a lot of ground, as always. I love talking about all these different issues with you, and I really appreciate you joining me.
Me too. Thanks for having me, buddy. I really do. I love it.
There she goes, S.E. Cupp on Twitter, at S.E. Cupp. Watch her on the TV. Read her on the New York Daily News. Check her website out, secupp.com. But always great speaking with her, and let her know that you heard her on the show. That means a lot. She's on Instagram as well. But if you tweet her, she'll see it. She'll appreciate it, I'm sure. At S.E. Cupp, let her know. Okay, so the Rutgers University in New Jersey has a great school of medicine and public health, and they reached out to me to try to get me to talk to some of their experts, and I was happy to do that because it's a great school. And so I don't know, I'm going to have a conversation with them about trying to have like a monthly segment with different experts from the School of Public Health at Rutgers in New Jersey. But today, my first guest from the School of Public Health at Rutgers is an associate professor in the Department of Biostatistics and Epidemiology. He has researched HIV, AIDS, LGBT health, hidden and hard-to-reach populations. He's worked with the Ministries of Health and other international organizations all over the world, from Australia to Africa to Asia. And he's just a really smart, nice guy who I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with for the first time. I don't think on Twitter, but he's just a great guy to talk to. And I learned a lot about the CDC guidelines and more for the first time from Dr. Henry Raymond. Welcome him on right now. are one of the 75 most influential graduates of University of California, Berkeley, some program.
I think I was the only one they could find.
Very happy to have you joining me. Thank you very much for joining me to educate us here on the show, Dr. Henry Raymond. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.
So the CDC guidelines are out. I just want you to I'm sorry I have to ask you to react to this tweet, but I did see it, and I think it's, some people, kind of buy into this stuff. She writes, she's a kind of a news anchor at one of these right-wing conspiracy news sites, but she says, anyone else watching these CDC guidance announcements feeling like you don't live in America right now? Why is the CDC telling me what to do in my own home? Dr. Raymond, I think she's misinterpreting what the CDC does and what these guidelines are about what you can or should do versus what you have to do in your own home.
Well, I think it's really clear. These are guidelines that, based on research and data and the best scientific minds, are putting out there as a guidance for people to be able to take care of their own health and take care of other people's health, because we're all a community. These are not laws or regulations. Right? They haven't made a law that you can only visit with people in your own home. Of course, they're not saying that. So there's a big difference between a guidance, which is intended to give the public the best information to keep everybody healthy, and legislating something that says you can or cannot do something. It's totally different things.
Right. I just want to ask you just a general question about the CDC and how experts like yourself look at that institution, because arguably its reputation was damaged during the Trump administration, because some people say they politicized a lot of their decisions and they were influenced by politics. Some people might argue the same about the Biden administration and their guidance. They said they'll be dedicated to science. Is there anything that you've seen come out of the CDC since this new president has taken over that seems like, in some way or another, that politics is influencing the guidelines? I mean, people are talking about schools and teachers, talking about, these latest guidelines with travel, the airline industry. Do you think any of these decisions are politically influenced?
Well, I don't think we can ever disentangle public health from politics. Public health, the word public is in there, and that relies on getting people's engagement and buy-in and having people make decisions for policy and resource allocation. The dynamic tension between politics and public health probably go back to the quarantines in Venice, right? I'm sure the businessmen in Venice wanted those ships with all those good stuff from the Orient coming into their port and be able to be bought and sold. But the powers that be were also very worried about everyone getting sick and die. So it's always a dynamic tension. Some of these things, it's not necessarily a right-wing, left-wing thing. I mean, if you think back to the early days of the AIDS epidemic, it was the liberal folk that were screaming out loud that the health department was closing bathhouses or suggesting that you limit the number of sexual partners you have. So there's always that dynamic tension. And I think that, I think that we would like to be able to work in a totally data-driven environment. But we also have to acknowledge that, especially when something's new like this, we're only learning as we go. And so it's really hard to say this is all entirely data-driven when we know we don't know stuff. And so it puts the CDC in a very awkward position. And they've been in an awkward position many times, from administration to administration, on what they can say and they can't say, what they can fund and what they can't fund. And we're going back to the AIDS epidemic. Senator Jesse Helms really said you couldn't fund, teaching people alternate sex practices that were less risky, right? So it's always going to be there. And I think working in an environment, that's why was one of the reasons why I've never wanted to work at the CDC. I'd like to work with the CDC. But, there's only, it's such a hotbed of that dynamic that it's a tough place to work, I think.
Let me just ask you just quickly, I should have asked you this at the beginning, but just kind of a personal question, given where you have worked and what you have studied and what you've done. I mean, at what point does Dr. Henry Raymond, as a young man, say, I want to be an epidemiologist? Like, I'm so glad there are specialists like yourself who have done heroic work, as you mentioned, on HIV. I've been reading all about your background, but like, just real quick, like, there's a lot of people doing what you're doing. They're so important. I want to celebrate that, but just why did you choose this? Viruses.
Well, first of all, I wasn't a young man when I chose it. If you look at the timeline on my CV, I didn't go and start getting advanced degrees and really focus on epidemiology until my 40s. But growing up as a gay man in the early 80s, it's boom, right in your forehead every day. Moving to San Francisco and living through the 90s before antiretroviral therapies, before people were living longer, it's just it's a real thing, and I think it's sort of like very compelling, very close to home. And so I think it was kind of the right choice for me. I think we're seeing that again here in the COVID-19 era is, public health school applications are skyrocketing. People are so motivated by their personal experiences with this pandemic that it's really igniting a lot of interest in the field. And I think that's a great thing. Well, it's an unfortunate thing that it took that to get the interest up, but that's the kind of thing that motivates people.
Yeah, well, whatever it takes to fight apathy, sometimes it's reality. But seeing as that was your entry into epidemiology, I wonder if there's any, obviously there's a lot of different connections, both socially and scientifically, to make with any type of virus, but how it affected us socially, from Dan Savage to Dr. Anthony Fauci. I've heard a lot of people who are, fought the AIDS virus and fought the politics and try to help people better understand and get educated. Where do you think there are parallels, if any, with the fight that we're now in? And it's not just a smaller percentage of the population with obviously a different virus that spreads obviously quite differently as well.
I mean, I think some of the parallels are unfortunate parallels where, and they can't necessarily have been any different in both cases because both were new on the scene.
Yeah.
But nobody had experience with them. And so if you're learning to build the car as you drive the car, as we often do in public health, especially with something new, there's always that kind of, the whole going around that Tony Fauci keeps changing his mind, right? And that can feel that way, but it's updating his scientifically driven opinion based on the newest available data. And with something as new as SARS-CoV-2, that's unavoidable.
In your field, you don't often use the phrase, "Oh, I changed my mind."
No, it's not what changed my mind. I didn't just change my mind. I now have new data that I would base a different, recommendation on.
So getting back to the CDC guidelines, I think what you want people to know right away from the start, anybody in, I think, public health that's going to communicate, is to remind us of the most important thing, that the vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting the virus, correct?
Yes, that is correct. It prevents you from developing developing COVID-19, and in particular, especially the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, prevents people who get COVID-19 from having really bad symptoms and death. So that being said, the vaccine is protecting you, but there's the slight chance that you could still be transmitting the virus to other people. And that's why these guidelines are very clear that you're talking about being able to hang out with people who are also vaccinated or people who are low risk and unvaccinated in small groups, not in huge outdoor public gatherings. And when it comes to potentially being in contact with people who are unvaccinated, you really have to think about their risk profile. So if it's grandma who's got diabetes and all sorts of other conditions, it's not yet time to have grandma over for dinner.
Is there anything in the CDC guidelines that you don't agree with? I mean, I know, don't you give them information, data, your research? Don't you participate and work with the CDC yourself and your school? And so that doesn't mean that you're...
So right now, I mean, to be totally honest, right now, they're mostly working with health departments and the medical system, because that's where the bulk of the work is sort of like the first responder work. When we get to schools of public health and epidemiologists, not necessarily the outbreak investigator, epidemiologist, but the people who do the follow-up. We're sort of just getting into it now to get into the real details. So they're looking at vaccine efficacy. They're looking at susceptibility data from all these sources of data, and coming up with, granted, conservative guidelines, right? They're balancing people's desires and safety at the same time. We're also in a place where a small proportion of people in the United States are vaccinated. So there's still a huge pool of people who could become infected and develop disease. So that's why it really is focused on the small baby step of vaccine and in small gatherings.
One of the most interesting developments is that grandparents are going to be able to see their grandkids. And that's my situation. I'm really excited because my parents are 2 weeks past their second vaccination, and they've been waiting impatiently for a year. And so I'm bringing them up there this week, and the guidelines say that's okay, even though, it's 4 hours away, but we won't be seeing probably anybody but them. They say don't travel, but we're doing that, and it seems reasonable in terms of the risk and in terms of the reward. And that's the kind of, I feel like, interpretation that we're supposed to have, a thoughtful one.
That is always the case. Everybody's situation is different too. And I don't think, I use a travel example. You've always been able to get in your car and drive to another state. You go to a park, look around, come home. That's not a risk, right? So that personal situation will be fine. But when they said don't travel so much, it's because they don't necessarily know what you're doing when you get to that other place. Are you going to a rock concert? Are you going to play a game of rugby with strangers?
Well,
I don't know what that is.
Let me just throw one at you. I mean, and I'm also, by the way, not worried because the other guideline is, if you have comorbidities, like I haven't been vaccinated, but my parents have. My 16-year-old daughter had COVID, and my younger daughter, I don't think has. But that's our situation. And because my body is a temple and my BMI is absolutely optimal, sir.
Looks it.
Thank you. I'm feeling safe. The point is, it's open to everybody's specific situation you have to consider. But since you mentioned the concert thing, I do think I just want to get your comment on what's most relevant this week. Spring break, Dr. Raymond. I mean, what do you make of the fact that there are locations in states like Texas, South Padre Island? I myself was never invited to one of those MTV spring breaks, but I never went. But I mean, people will be going and they will be rubbing their filthy bodies against each other, really close. Corey, you know what spring break is. We all do. And just what do you make of this spring break coinciding with the Texas mask lifting and other regulations lifting?
I think it's a little worrisome. I mean, we saw this happen last 4th of July. Fire Island, the guys were all over each other. The Jersey Shore, big house parties. So we've been down this road before. And most of those people going to spring break are not going to be vaccinated. They're certainly not anywhere near the high end of the list, the queue. And if you're going to places that are relaxing, and there's so many factors that I think I go back to a comment you made. You have to be thoughtful about your own risks and your risk to benefit ratio, right? Is it worth it? Right? So, yeah, I think that if I had a kid, I'd say they can't go. I have a kid, but he's 5 years old. So, he's not going to that yet, I hope. But I would say, maybe we don't want to do that,
Right. Yeah, it does. I mean, and I think the last question, unless there's anything else that you wanted to mention here, is how do we know? I mean, I believe it. I'm not questioning it, but how do we know the effectiveness of the masks? It's been so frustrating to see that become a culturally divisive thing. And I've been making all kinds of jokes about, we should tell firemen not to use fire extinguishers.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I think they call them the face condom in Germany. It's kind of cool. Because Germans like to make up these huge compound words. They don't make a new word. They just kind of string things together. But I guess I'd say that we have implicit understanding of how it should work. We have years and years of anecdotal evidence that it does work from our Asian colleagues, right, who routinely wear masks. And people are working on lots of different research studies to prove this in the lab. And I just read something interesting this past week about even just the fact that it re-moisturizes the air coming into your lungs is helpful. So there's so many things going on with the mask wearing. First, I don't think you can go wrong by trying anything to be safer.
Right.
You know, do we know the exact percent effectiveness? I think we're still working through that in the science point of view, right? But we all know that, you know, we don't know if we all drove 120 miles an hour, what the rate of fatalities on the highway would be. But we know it'd be less if we wear seatbelts. We don't necessarily need to crash a bunch of cars.
Scientific experiments have certain morality about not conducting certain experiments.
Well, yeah, and I just think some things are reasonably common sense.
Right.
So
I hate that phrase. I hate the phrase "common sense" as it applies to politics. As it applies to this, I mean, it couldn't be more clear.
There's no common sense in the politics. Politics is all about the art of the deal, right? And not to use that quote from that.
Yeah, you're
person.
not allowed to use. I'm so sorry. We have to strike that from the recording. Art of the deal.
Yeah, that's fine. It was not supposed to be a promotional moment, but I mean, art of the possible. I can use that one, right? That's Juan Perón.
Well, I did have one more question. The controversy out of the guidelines is. Apparently, the one main controversy is coming from the airline industry where they're saying, listen, we're doing everything we possibly can, spending a lot of money, or maybe they're getting the money from the government for guidelines, testing people as they come in the airport, as they get on the airplane. Everybody's got to wear a mask. We're seating them apart. We're doing everything, and it's really safe, and the air is circulating in this mode. We got it figured out. Don't tell people not to travel. Do they have a case, the airline industry? Are you an airline industry apologist, Doctor?
No. I don't think I'm an apologist. I mean, I think when they say, and I don't see it here specifically in the guidelines, but I think I've seen it in the press, you know, this is not permission to just go travel. I think even if you're vaccinated, you still have to do that thoughtful assessment of the risks and benefits for yourself, and not just yourself, but also the people around you.
Yeah.
You know? This is not like you can choose not to have sex and not expose somebody to HIV. This is you breathing. You know, you can't choose not to breathe.
Yeah, it's a way. Absolutely, I have a lot of follow-ups with that, but it's such an obvious truth. I don't know why it's got to be so controversial. I thought maybe it's the airline saying, or the public health experts saying, listen, it's not that you're going to get sick on an airplane or give it to somebody on an airplane. The problem with airline travel, and I learned this right at the beginning of the pandemic, is why it's not like 1918, because we can freaking go all over the world in a couple of hours, thus bringing the vaccine too. So if you do go to Florida, Texas, wherever you're going, and there's more vaccine there, and you bring it back to the community that you've been so safe in living in Vermont, that's where the problem lies. That's my understanding, but maybe...
Well, I mean, that is a very true situation, and that's why these things, you know, rip through the entire world so quickly. This is not like the Black Death that took years to go from, you know, Asia to England, right? You get on an airplane, and that's even increased since SARS #1, right? Just this mobility of people. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the underlying issues. It's if we all lived on our own little islands and stayed there, it'd be fine.
Well, I really am psyched to have been in your classroom and have access to you. Dr. Henry Raymond is at the Rutgers University School of Public Health, and great to talk to you. Really appreciate you taking my questions today.
Thanks very much, Pete.
Well, let me know what you thought of Dr. Raymond. I learned a lot from talking to him, as I do from all of the experts that I speak to and interesting folks that I speak to every day. If you know anybody you'd like me to talk to, or if that person is you, reach out, standupwithpete@gmail.com. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you, S.E. Cupp. Thank you to Dr. Henry Raymond, and thank you to Pete Coe for the news dump jingle, and thank you for all of you who are supporting me with a paid subscription. If you haven't already signed up to support the stand-up community, do it now, patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. I will talk to you tomorrow. I'll have Dr. Arthur Kaplan joining me, and more, I am sure. I've decided who else I'm going to talk to or which interview I'm going to play, but it will be good, it will be smart, and I will thank you for joining me. That's it. You're not alone. I love you. I hope you're okay, and check in anytime you want. Take it away, John Carroll.
making sense, and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Hello. Hello, exclusive member of an exclusive group, the Show Enders. Hello, Show Ender. And now, audio from television journalist Roger Mudd, who passed away at the age of 93 years old. He was once Walter Cronkite's primary substitute at CBS. Here he is announcing the death of Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley, the singer who shaked, rattled, and rolled his way to rock history in the 1950s, died today in Memphis. He was 42. Presley, whose influence on rock music was enormous, spawning a whole generation of imitators and stars in their own right, was pronounced dead on arrival at Baptist Hospital in Memphis. Hospital officials said he died of respiratory distress, but they were no more specific than that. In recent years, Presley was plagued by weight problems and fatigue. His trademark was his gyrating hips, a style so controversial that when he began gyrating during a 1956 appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, he was shown only from the waist up.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never going to rap it.
That song, Hound Dog, was one of the Presley records that sold 1 million copies, and there were more than 30 of them. And tonight, a spokeswoman for the Memphis Police Department said detectives were investigating, quote, the strong possibility that Presley's death was a result of an overdose of drugs.
Roger Mudd, what a life. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good day.